Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Frost & Sullivan's latest webinar. Today's event is titled The Impact of Artificial Intelligence in Medical Imaging. My name is Jalen, and I'm a part of Frost & Sullivan's corporate communications team. Now, before we begin, I would like to go over a few notes with you all. The presentation will include detailed slides, so there is a full screen feature available at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. You can safely share this briefing at any time via social media, email, or blogs. Today's discussion will also be available on demand shortly after we've finished. And finally, don't forget to submit your questions throughout the session today. Our presenters today are Nadeem Daher, Industry Principal for Medical Imaging and Informatics at Frost & Sullivan, and Sid Shah, Industry Analyst for Visionary Science at Frost & Sullivan. With that, I would now like to hand the presentation over to Nadeem.
Thank you very much, Jalen, and thank you all for joining us today on this webinar. We're very excited to showcase some highlights of our ongoing research on this extremely exciting topic that is artificial intelligence in medical imaging. So in the time we have today, we want to put things into context and try to rationalize the hype that all of us have probably identified for AI in medical imaging. Then we'll look at the three major opportunities that we've identified for medical imaging across the image analysis using AI, the cognitive computing applied to medical image processes, and then the embedded AI that's affecting medical imaging equipment. We'll share some patterns that we've observed through our in-depth analysis of this developing space across the competitive ecosystem, the investment landscape, as well as the early market adoption patterns that we've started to see. We'll conclude with some recommendations for everyone involved in the field and leave time for a question and answers session towards the end. So to put things into context first, it's really a big family of diverse technologies that have been coming together over the last few years. And many of these are not new, especially artificial intelligence can be traced back 30 to 40 years ago. The same applies to machine learning, which is, again, not necessarily a novelty. The real disruptor or the real new driver for this field is deep learning and the use of neural networks, especially applied to imaging across all industries, and especially its applicability to medical imaging. So this diagram is a very simplified version, but you would have a lot of other technologies like natural language processing and computer vision that cut across these three core components. So what's been happening since 2011, which is when we can probably put the starting point for the big news cycle that we're entering for AI in medical imaging, it's essentially the coming together of three core components, and the synergy between the three is what we're witnessing today. So on one hand, there's the technologies, which collectively we can call cognitive algorithms. The other essential part is fast computing, which is the ability to process huge amounts of data in a very rapid manner. And here, the development on the computing hardware, computing acceleration, like notably graphic process unit GPUs, has been crucial. And then the third core component, which is fueling this entire space, is image data sets. And we're lucky enough in medical imaging to have a long legacy, of 2 to 3 decades of digitizing data, of building big databases in PACS archives and in regional repositories that are really now becoming gold mines to analyze and apply in cognitive fashion. So the three core opportunities that we'll go through today, the one main, low-hanging fruit, if you may, is the medical image analysis. And this is the one that's really creating the excitement right now. It's essentially applying all kinds of image analysis tools to our medical images to do anything from automating very heavy, manual intensive tasks that today are done with eyeballing or with, a lot of clicking and a lot of time from expensive resources such as radiologists. The other one is accelerating the way we analyze and interpret images. And the third one is augmenting. So doing more analysis, more quantification, things that we're not necessarily doing today on our images. So that's the deep learning part. The second part, which is at a higher level, so that's getting us outside of the pixels and voxels. This is looking at the workflow, the processes going from end to end for an imaging event, and applying cognitive computing and applications to this overall process. And then embedded AI is when this technology starts getting close, if not within, the imaging equipment, and that's ushering a new generation of imaging equipment, just like we've seen in the car industry with the self-driving cars that are coming of age. So if we look at things, if we break things by across the image data chain, essentially where this the various AI technologies are applied across the creation of data, which is at the modality at the edge, which is right there when an image is reconstructed and output by a modality, to the on-premise application, which is our PACS workstation, our post-processing workstations, where we analyze and interpret image studies, and then cloud-based is moving that to the server. Most, if not all, of what we're seeing today has been on this on-premise, at this on-premise stage. So we're creating local niche algorithms that are applied to images in the regular workplace where we're sitting and analyzing these images. The last 2 to 3 years have been very much about moving a lot of this to servers, to clouds, in software as a service mechanisms, in cloud services, ecosystems, so that it all becomes much more widely available, and also to start doing some continuous learning by leveraging the high volume of usage of these various algorithms. So, but perhaps the more exciting trend that we're just starting to see now is the move of all of these algorithms and applications closer to the modality, in places before there's any human that's able to interpret and view these images. So the edge applications are really game-changing in some ways. And then what we're identifying here as the next frontier, where we're seeing some very early steps taken, mostly at the R&D level of different institutions and very early stage startups, is the in-scanner AI, and getting some of these technologies applied to raw signals, pre-pixels, within equipment at places where we as humans cannot, decipher and cannot make sense of that raw data. So we've made a diligent exercise of trying to paint the competitive landscape that's been forming around imaging AI. And what's interesting for me as an analyst who's been tracking this field for over 12 years now is there really hasn't been that kind of rally in imaging since the digitization of medical imaging. And even that, so the inception of PACS and digital imaging has not attracted the attention of the big major IT vendors, like Amazon and Microsoft and IBM, the way that imaging AI has. So these huge, the GAFAM type players are not only coming in to support this developing space, they are actually developing their own native solutions and want to play directly in addition to supporting indirect relationships in the field. So this last box is very crowded. The bottom one, independent software vendors, we're tracking, as some future slides show, over 90 different ISVs, all of which have developed their own application using convolutional networks and deep learning, essentially, across all types of imaging modalities for all types of clinical applications. And the boxes on the top, this is who we consider to be the core, incumbent imaging and informatics vendors. Again, there's not a single one that has not, at least over the last 2 to 3 years, that has not ramped up its play, that has not either entered extensively, with in-house R&D or with an aggressive partnership approach to have a play in this area. So that all serves to really ascertain that there's something huge going on here and that things are going to continue to heat up. So some of the outcomes of our analysis of each and every company we've identified in the space, we're showing over the next few slides. So this is a simple metric, the number of startups shown by the year they were founded. And you can see how, every year has brought a share of additional new startup coming in to the market. In the next version of this slide, when we show the number of applications tied to these different startups, is when we will definitely see more of a exponential, hockey stick curve with, due to the fact that these startups, especially those with more than 2 to 3 years of existence, they start launching their second, if not third application. And when we start showing, a third curve with the approved applications in that regulatory bodies in some countries have already, green lighted, is also when another one where we're starting to show an exponential curve shape starting around 2013, 2014, when the first approvals came in. So, another simple metric we look is, where these startups have been coming from. And the first few years have very much been about, the most entrepreneurial places in the globe. So the United States was very fast in the build-up of this startup community. Israel was one of the very early movers. And what's been very interesting to see just recently is how fast China and the United Kingdom, to some extent as well, have been ramping up very quickly. So new startups coming out in the last few years from various countries, and China is the one where we expect to see more and more dynamics. As we started looking at the financials of this space, one simple thing we've done is diligently adding up together every publicly announced source of investment. And this is just looking at the entrepreneurial type of investors. So venture capitalists, private equity, investment banks, and listing, over, I think, close to 100 of these sort of deals, some of which are already a Series D or E, as you can see here. And when we add it all up, it's coming out to over $1 billion. And when we factor in other types of investment, like in-house R&D by the different actors in the field, and when we add in M&A activity, of which the most noteworthy one is that definitely the acquisition by IBM Watson of Merge Healthcare, which we all know is very much about imaging AI for $1 billion. Adding all these things up, we're getting close to the $6 billion mark. So that's a huge investment in this field that has yet to pay out, obviously, and that there's a lot of anticipation. But at the same time, if all these investors have been convinced, it supports the idea that it's going to pay out indeed. So let's talk a little bit about this, again, low-hanging fruit, more mature application space, which is image analysis. I'll hand it over to my colleague Sid here to show a couple of the patterns that we've observed as we looked at where and how the different ISVs have applied their solution. Over to you, Sid.
All right, thanks, Nadim, and hello, everyone. So in trying to understand the focus of AI applications, we listed out all of the AI companies we identified with solutions for radiology and ophthalmology, but excluding the areas of endoscopy and pathology. For each company, all AI solutions, which were either in development or approved by any regulatory agency globally across the US, Europe, Japan, South Korea, China, Canada, or even Australia, were listed. And we've marked June 2018 as the cutoff date for our analysis, considering the continual changes in this field. Now, from a list of 120 odd companies, we've identified more than 90 companies that have AI solutions, and this data was analyzed for various insights. Now, what you see here on this slide and the next one are the two outputs of this analysis. On this slide, we have an analysis of the 93 medical imaging AI companies with defined modalities that they focus on. And the applications for AI began with CT as a modality focus. But as you can see, MRI is catching up now and has been growing in a big way. The largest three modalities are hardly a surprise. Cancer diagnosis relies on CT, MRI, and X-rays, and it's also a major disease of focus for AI applications. So I'll just take it back, and fewer companies focus on other imaging modalities such as mammography and 3D tomosynthesis, again for breast cancer, and ultrasound echocardiography for cardiac conditions. Another area that has gained prominence is of fundus imaging, especially because of the interest in it by the giants of Google, Amazon, and even Tencent in China. Even some startups have targeted this area, especially for diabetic retinopathy screening and diagnosis. And a startup recently got the first FDA approval for an autonomous AI system in this space, and it has also been deployed in a big US health system already. General ultrasound is a niche category with some startups as well as imaging equipment makers like the large giants of Philips and GE addressing this modality. In terms of the organ focus, a majority of the 88 companies that are covered in this analysis seem to be targeting a single organ. Now, that's reflective of a cautious approach to gain sufficient expertise in one area first, and let me talk about the major ones here. Unsurprisingly, brain is the most targeted. Apart from brain tumors, stroke, and trauma, and other areas are also now being targeted, that is the neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Lungs and breast follow next, breast obviously for breast cancer, and lungs for lung cancer, but also several other areas, respiratory conditions like COPD, interstitial lung disease, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and others. Now, currently, the heart follows next with a cardiovascular disease focus, but in the coming few years, we expect it to leapfrog over the others to gain a higher spot in this ranking, owing to an increasing number of companies looking at developing solutions for the cardiac area. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Nadeem, for taking us through the rest of the slides.
Thanks, Sid. That's very interesting. And I do think we're starting to see here a pattern where the entrants have been, as you said, cautious, trying to start with something, quote unquote, easy, like CT lends itself very well because of the high quality, high resolution of images. But now that people feel ready, to tackle MRI, which is more complex, and they're starting to tackle PET, which is even more complex, from an image analysis of big volumes of these procedures, that's when things, start to get really interesting. And as you said, the heart is a big frontier due to the challenging images that come out. So the work we've been focusing a lot on is understanding how this is all going to play out in the field. I think we're getting past this question we've heard a lot, as you all probably did as well. Is AI going to replace radiologists, or is it going to augment them? It's still a very valid question, but our approach is to break things down in light of the developments we're seeing, including things like, Sid mentioned, an autonomous algorithm getting regulatory approval in the U.S. to identify the diabetic retinopathy. I mean, that's huge. So in light of all that, we're breaking it down and trying to see how in different contexts of usage, whether it is, how high volume scenario of routine type exams, or whether it's, the advanced imaging scenario where it's very, subspecialized types of reads and applying very novel concepts like image quantification and radiomics and whatnot, we see the different usage scenarios really getting at play, where some of it is going to give AI a preliminary function of an initial read, like a screening, before the regular workflow that's human-based comes in. In some cases, we do see a supplementary scenario where AI can rule out, for example, what it thinks is a true negative and have no human look at that. And in many cases, it's going to be, that's a more careful approach. It's going to be a complementary approach where especially the subspecialists are going to juggle with a palette of algorithms and using that to augment and complement their analysis of complex studies. So it's really across the board, and there's no simple answer. The other big question that's on the mind of everyone now in the industry is, how is this all going to pay out? How are we going to monetize this huge investment we've put into this? It's not all about radiologists, really. We're seeing the different players target value propositions that cater to very different levels of the imaging organizations, all the way from the technologists to the radiology management and hospital health system management, all the way to even payers with medical imaging solutions. Various outcomes and value propositions are being tracked, and to get this to pay off, obviously there's a few current CPT codes that are already established for some post-processing or for some CAD, but that's not going to suffice. If some health provider decide to use these codes for the AI solutions, that may work, but that's not going to be the big payout. Similarly, we're at least a few years from having the RVUs established for these types of applications. So we probably cannot bet on a direct reimbursement approach and per procedure, reimbursement of the technical effort as we have for a lot of our traditional technology. And in fact, is this AI really providing a technical, or is it a professional component? When you look at how it's applied, some may argue it's actually providing a professional component in some cases. So what we think is going to be the reality over the next several years is outcome-based models, and really being able to identify, prove, quantify the value add that these applications bring, and charge providers a share of this value addition. So whether it's a savings on radiologist times, whether it's a profit margin increase on the profitability of images, a time gain, a productivity gain, etc. It's all going to boil down to value addition and getting a cut out of that for the software developers. I'd like to pause here for a second and hand it over to you, Jalen, to ask our audience a question that's pressing on our mind and which we hope you have an opinion on. Jalen?
Thank you, Nadim. So today's poll question is as follows. Of the following key image analysis use cases of AI, which ones do you think will be taken up first in the mainstream market? A, automation, applications for automating some manual intensive tasks. B, acceleration, algorithms for getting through a study interpretation more quickly. C, augmentation, tools providing advanced analysis of image features. D, quality assurance, other tools to ensure a high quality image. Or E, none of the above. Feel free to answer the poll questions, and I'll give you guys some time.
Do we have some good answers, Jalen?
Yes, we'll go ahead and move forward.
So I'm reading. Should I read out the answers we got, Jalen, or does it show on the screen? So we have 48% of you all who have answered A, automation. 24% answered acceleration, another 24% answered augmentation, and 4% answered quality assurance. So I think overall we have a pretty bullish audience here, where the harder use cases of automation is the one where you all think is most likely to indeed enter the mainstream market. That's probably, a quite optimistic scenario, but it's not unlikely to happen, especially I think in places where, where there's less barriers to adoption, as we're seeing like in China, for example. I think automation is on the table in the first phase. So moving on here across our three growth opportunities, the second one we're very excited about, but it's less mature today. When you plot the imaging workflow, from end to end, going from ordering an image and why it was ordered, all the way to scheduling it, acquiring the image, assigning it to the proper resource, down to, analyzing, interpreting, deciding, and ultimately reporting and following up on the image exam. So again, the analysis step is where, all the attention has been so far, and we've gone through this as what we call the low-hanging fruit here. But we're starting to see across each and every one of these steps across the workflow, some use cases developing, some company developing an algorithm, some early stage application that can improve this or provide a new way of doing that. I think, for example, the way we've been relying on clinical guidelines that take years and years to be curated and validated, I think that's set to be disrupted by AI, because suddenly we have a view of many exams and the ultimate outcome of the patient that underwent this exam, and we can start using this to develop new appropriateness and ordering guidelines. So that's one we're really excited about. And again, some simple things like how to smartly display images for a radiologist on the screen, so automating some of the hanging and some of the pre-processing, that's all very, very exciting as well. We don't underestimate the impact of these, workflow tools across the board. And this is where, when we're outside of, again, the pixels and the voxel, where we're looking at the process of imaging, this is where it becomes essential to put imaging in its broader context of patient care. And by the same token, to put imaging data in its much broader context of patient data. So here we're showing just, how diversified and rich clinical data has become, and that's not even showing, the whole operational and the whole financial side of things. So, this is going to be the essence. This is what, the big repositories where we're linking up imaging archives, databases to other types of data and finding out the relationships between them and identifying how, genomics and radiology correlate, for example, or pathology and imaging correlate. This is where we're going to get into this new paradigm of precision medicine, personalized medicine, and really leveraging big data. And that's what we think is the key here, is integrating all the data together. It's also essential to keep in mind, as these different applications get rolled out in the market, how different the messaging, the value proposition, the concept that they defend, how different it's going to be by country. So this is also an oversimplified view of, 3 key countries, but that's, one way of showing how the United States have been all about, looking at AI to improve productivity, to help standardize across the big consolidated health systems, their imaging operations and the quality across the system, the imaging service lines becoming more standardized across the health system. Whereas in the United Kingdom, for example, you have a real government embracing, the NHS has decisively embraced AI as one way to solve the big challenges that radiology is facing in the country. Things like, not enough radiologists to address the workload, studies not getting read on time, patients waiting weeks to get their image done and more weeks to get it read. And the same applies to China, where really it's a national trend to embrace AI across all industries, and healthcare is definitely one of them. And looking at AI as one tool in the ambition to get better healthcare access in the rural areas, to have underserved populations be able to access higher expertise. And AI is better than nothing if the other choices have no imaging and no one to read those exams. So this is where I think the automation can really become a reality. So a few more words on the third growth opportunity, which we are extremely excited about, but that's very early stage, is where we can safely say today that AI, deep learning especially, is going to be the driver of the development of the next generation of medical imaging equipment. It is really setting out to address the big technology limitations of our imaging modalities today. So it's the way that vendors are saying we can solve, let's say, the big problem in ultrasound, which is user dependence and the lack of reproducibility of our exams. AI, deep learning is going to be the way to go, whether it's to make the acquisition more standard, or the image that's acquired more more standard. The same applies to MRI, where the big challenge is still, with compressed sensing, we have much better images. We have them, out of the scanner faster, but we spend, 20, 30 minutes processing the data. So there, with the early move of applying deep learning to image reconstruction in MRI, is also where we can start seeing that the next generation of MRIs is getting us a step closer to this, holy grail of real-time MRI in 10 or 20 years. But we're not there yet. We think that smart medical imaging machines in the short to midterms are going to do a lot of smart things that we're starting to notice today. With applying AI at the edge, is where we can start really adapting the imaging exam to the specificity of our patients. With, by using a lot of sensors, integrating all of that, we can personalize the imaging acquisition protocol, which is emulating the self-driving car. Again, it's a bunch of sensors looking around and making a quick decision on how to adapt. It's going to be more and more self-driving, and we're starting to see this when we have AI algorithms that can spot hemorrhage in the brain, for example, that are going in CT machines that are onboard ambulances. This means, a patient with suspected stroke is being imaged right there, and the algorithm, without a radiologist on board, is telling us this is likely a hemorrhagic stroke, or this is likely ischemic stroke, and based on that, we can drive the ambulance to the right place and save very precious minutes. So responding to preliminary findings in images and getting this to impact patient management, or automate altogether some emergency reads when there's no resource available. That's a feature of the smart equipment we're starting to see. Obviously, on the maintenance side, there's huge impact as well. These machines are going to be more and more aware of their own health, of able to monitor themselves better, and for us to manage them better as assets and do more preventative but also predictive maintenance. These scanners, as they get, as they feed their data into this big data lake that we see as the need for healthcare in the future, they're also getting a lot of information in from this data ecosystem, and so they'll be more and more cognizant about the study context, why it was ordered, what it's looking for, where the patient is in their pathway, and adapting the imaging event based on that, based on where we are and where we want to go with that patient. And then comes the train for the task, which is applying deep learning to the raw signals and getting new ways of reconstructing images with a lot less time, with less contrast for those modalities that use contrast, and essentially get more depth and insight from images. And that's going to be a big game changer. So with our GPUs getting inside these machines, we can really start realistically doing a lot of new ways of producing images. This won't happen with AI alone. It's about, in our mind, 5 key enabling technologies, where cognitive computing and fast computing are 2 essential ones. But this connectivity to the outside world with the cloud, this big data ecosystem surrounding the imaging equipment, and the Internet of Things, which is that the ability to talk about itself and to hear about other actors in its ecosystem. These 5 key enabling technologies have to come together to usher in the self-driving intelligent medical imaging machine. Just one more minute to touch on a topic that Siddharth actually mentioned, which is, we've really focused here on radiology imaging, with the exception of fundus, which is not really radiology, but the 2 ancillary health imaging areas of endoscopy and then digital pathology are the next ones in line. And we're starting to see very interesting developments there. It's not as big, as dynamic as we have seen in radiology, but it's coming along pretty quickly. So that's 2 areas we'll be keeping a pulse on. As conclusion, I think we all agree medical imaging AI is here. It's no matter a question of, whether it's going to happen. It is happening. We have regulatory approvals. We have, health providers starting to buy into them, going from soft use cases to harder ones. It is happening, and I think it's no longer reasonable to say, do I want this or not? It's about how will I make the best use of this? And that applies to all stakeholders in medical imaging. For both vendors and providers, it's the phase we're entering now, which is market deployment. It's the time it should be spent now on refining testing value propositions, understanding the limitations, and what it can do better than we do today. For vendors, it's about refining, testing new partnership approaches, and figuring out what the right go-to-market strategies are. It's not only about image analysis. That is a big one, and we're in the process of doing a deep market sizing exercise where we're noticing how big the addressable market is for just the image analysis piece. But again, there's a lot more to it. There'll be AI-enabled equipment. There'll be AI cognitive across the imaging workflows. And with that, I'd like to turn it over back to Jalen and answer some of the questions that have come in.
Thank you, Nadim, Sid, for your insightful presentation. Now I'd like to quickly go over some next steps before we begin our Q&A session. If you would like more information on this discussion or our GPS to Leadership Council, we encourage you to reach out to us via our GoFrost hotline as well as by sending us an email to myfrost@frost.com. Also, your feedback is valuable to us, so under the Rate This button, please provide any feedback on today's presentation. And finally, we encourage you to follow us on any of our social media sites listed on this slide to keep up to date on any upcoming webinars, press releases, and research. So now I'd like to open the floor up for a Q&A. If you have any questions, please type your questions under the Ask a Question button. I think we have a few already, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. The first one is, you mentioned your survey is up to a point in time this year. Are you keeping your databases up to date with new information?
Yeah.
Sure, thanks. Sid, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thanks, Nadeem. So this area is like a moving target with several new pieces of information arriving literally weekly, and every conference has some new companies or products being introduced as well. We already have some 15 odd new companies identified as potential candidates to be included in post our June 2018 cutoff point. So we've designed our worksheet to be sort of a living one, if you will, and we will come up with an update study probably at the end of this year or early next year. So that will be updating with more information as we get it.
Yeah, really. I mean, every industry show is bringing its share of new developments. As we were looking at the announcements and developments at the American Society of Echocardiography, for example, just a couple of weeks ago, that alone unveiled, at least three players in echocardiography AI that we had not identified yet, and that used this show to show their works in progress or even things getting ready to become products. So, to Sid's point, this is a very fast-moving space. So we've had to develop this approach as a very scalable and evolutive one. So to keep our work relevant and accurate.
Thanks. So we're going to go ahead and go on to the next question. It says, is there any particular AI approach that you think is more promising over others that you would think would be very successful in medical imaging?
Sure, I can take a stab at this one. So there's obviously very many ways of describing various approaches to AI, but I'm personally a fan of the two things: the going from soft use cases to harder use cases. So the technology may be the same, but if it's positioned as an aid, as an augmentation, in the first phase, a double check, and gradually, again, it's the same application, but how it's positioned can gradually become harder, towards automation, towards preliminary reads that you trust. I think that stands a better way of getting more fastly embraced by the markets. It's also a way of starting small and thinking big for the vendors. If you go in with a brute force approach, like there's one company that's notoriously very aggressive and arrogant in the way it's saying we can do better than radiologists. Here's a clinical trial that shows we beat radiologists. I don't think that's the right approach. At the end of the day, without the radiologists embracing this, it's going to be pushback, and it's going to be looking for reasons to not adopt it. So I think to get the field to embrace, we need to go from soft to hard and from starting small and thinking big.
Thanks, Sid. We have another question. It says, what do you think is the biggest inhibitor to adopting AI for imaging?
There are a lot, but none that I think are things that are unsurmountable. I think there's a lot of ethical debates going on that's going to weigh in, especially in several countries. that are very keen about, data protection, about accountability of healthcare and how we view, care for citizens and whatnot. So that's one I would not underestimate, the whole ethical question. And then there will be more, right now it's a lot of excitement and, we did better than radiologists at this and we identified things that humans could not. But there has to be a trough of disillusionment, to quote the hype cycle of Gardner. There has to be, a phase, even though it be small, where we, some limitations start to show from the real life applications, from, like the transfer learning challenge, for example, is already identified as a big caveat to come, where it's about, algorithms that do very well with the well-curated data set they were trained with, but then suddenly when they get into the field, with all the variability in the modalities, in the image protocols, etc., then the performance decrease suddenly, and it's a black box. You have no idea that it's not performing right. So there's things where we will have some disillusionment, some limitations will become established, but it will help the next phase of adopting, knowing not just the promise, but also the limitations. And Sid, feel free to jump in if you have a take at these questions as well.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Nadim, we have a follow-up question maybe. Jalen, you want to take that one first?
Sure. The follow-up question says, what does soft use case versus hard use case mean?
So, yeah, I use this word with, quote unquote. So a soft use case is aiding, but not replacing. It's adding without supplanting. So it's saying, we can help you do this a bit quicker in the way you do it while keeping you in control. That's a soft use case. A hard use case is, don't worry about this. Let our AI do it for you. And here's the outcome of it. That's a hard use case. So automation, having an AI essentially interpret and study on your behalf is a hard use case, whereas, having the AI confirm what you've noticed or helping you, take a second closer look at something you may have missed, or suggesting you may have missed something, these are on the softer side. And that's all very visible on the claims that, different vendors make as they go to regulatory bodies. It's all about what claim you make, and some of these claims are of the soft type, and we've seen them indeed get approved and become FDA-approved products, for example, versus others that are taking the time it takes to have an indication that's on the hard side, that will take more time and scrutiny and to demonstrate. But then when it comes out, it can be pretty, game-changing.
Thank you, guys. So I'll go on to the next question. It says, how well do you feel the players in the market understand the difference between analytics and AI?
I think, to some extent, AI is a subset of analytics, where it's one approach, one type of technology is used to analyze our data. I think AI on the, hype curve and on the, what resonates best, what attracts attention, probably AI is much higher right now than analytics, which is, more a 2010 buzzword. but yeah, I don't think they can be used interchangeably. But at the same time, I do think they're very much linked to each other, with AI being a subset. I'd be curious to hear others' opinions on this.
Nadeem, to follow up with that, I completely agree with you, because I remember seeing this diagram about that tries to define the space, and it pretty much interlinks the data science as the umbrella term, and then you have analytics and AI coming together after as branches of that. So it's probably very difficult to separate those out, but yeah, we cannot definitely use them interchangeably for each other.
Thank you, guys.
I see one here about radiation oncology. It's a very interesting one.
Okay, I'll go ahead and read that one, and I think that'll be our final question today. The question is, have you looked at applications of AI to medical imaging and radiation oncology? Are there many startups in this space?
Well, that's one of the up-and-coming areas, where if you had asked this question 18 months ago, we would have said, yeah, we haven't come across much. Knowing that and it's a pretty busy space when you look at treatment planning solutions for radiation oncology. We always knew that the next generation of treatment planning systems would be using these next generation image analysis and deep learning and AI. But the last 18 months is when it's really starting to surface. And there's, I believe, 3 or 4 in our current database that we've identified going specifically after radiation oncology, specifically treatment planning. So it's about making this very cumbersome, multi-hour exercise of personalizing a treatment plan down to 10 and 20 minutes is some claims that we're starting to see. And it makes sense. I mean, with a large volume of how a treatment was planned for hundreds of patients, now that we know how to extract, cohorts of similar patients with similar characteristics, could even be from their genomics data. Now that this is a reality, it makes sense that you can start using this legacy of expertise as help for planning for your next patient. And not start from scratch every time, as the radiation oncology team. So it's a very promising area in our minds. Although it's a little bit niche, I think the impact is going to be huge in saving hours of work for, a very very big cost center that is oncology treatment.
Yeah, to add on to that, Nadeem, you're right. We have about 3, I think, companies that are playing in this space. I think one of them is a startup. The other is a larger player, and the third one is like a mid-tier sort of a player. So we have all kinds of companies at the moment, but yeah, we would expect more companies to come up in the space as we go ahead.
And if we have vendors on the audience today, and for example, you haven't seen your logo, or you feel our presentation lacked your vision and perception of things, etc. I mean, this is really meant to be showing what we've been up to, what we've been doing, what we're doing right now, but also to keep the discussion going with all of you about your views, your input into this analysis. Again, we're looking at a fast-moving target, and probably no one has figured out this whole space, and there's so many things to look for and into. And so we very much look forward to keep discussions going with all the community.
Thank you, Nadeem and Sid, for your answers. They were very insightful. This is going to go ahead and conclude today's presentation. We hope that you found the webinar very informative. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact us. And that's going to wrap up today's webinar. Thank you.